All right, this is Masters of Podcasting. We're going to talk about episode 7, All Together Now. My name's Melissa.
I'm Conley.
Gosh, what a boring episode this was. Nothing happened at all.
Well, it was one of those things, there were so many small moments, and especially in the later season, stuff that got built, to force towards the finale, but it was a lot of layering and to me, crazy moments besides the fact that Bill and Virginia begin the research together.
I kid. Obviously, a lot of things happen, but that kind of cast a long shadow over everything else. And I admit I forgot a lot of the details until I did the rewatch, because, like you said, that kind of eclipses everything else that happens in this one.
Well, and it was funny because right before I rewatched it, I was trying to remember, what are the things that happens in this episode? And the only thing that I could remember was the opening scene and them trying to have sex to Love Me Tender and it just going terribly.
Yeah, that was an interesting choice. I at the end, when on the original watch, at the end of episode 6, you watch the previews and they're like, oh my gosh, they're doing the intake interviews. Obviously, next episode they're going to start participating themselves. And any kind of traditional, I guess, or any other show, they would have them, really worry about and just be really conflicted about this decision, and then they would do all of this stuff. But this one just pulls absolutely no punches. They just start right out with it, and it's almost clinical. But I mean, obviously, it's got a tongue-in-cheek humor about it. But it's as clinical as I think Masters and Johnson themselves would have looked at it.
And it's kind of funny too, because although it's clinical, it's not by the book necessarily. They're not going in, taking the questionnaire, typing up the cards and everything, and then beginning the physical part of it. It's just, well, maybe we'll have some sex and get ourselves hooked up to these machines and figure it out from there.
Which was such an odd decision, and you don't find out that that's the chronology until later in the episode.
I liked that it was backwards in that way. I thought it was very funny.
It baffled me. I mean, it was funny, yeah, but it was kind of perplexing because I can't imagine both of them would try to screen themselves behind that thin veneer of professionalism that I'm kind of surprised, like, what prompted this? They just decided to give it a trial run. I mean, like, did the way GINI talks about it in the opening scene when they're in the observation room talking, she kind of makes it sound like she just did this one time just to see if she could throw him off. Not to purposely make the sex bad, but to just let him get it out of his system, and then maybe we can move on. But Bill persists, like he is wont to do.
Yeah, he just tries to pick and choose everything, and
yeah,
if it doesn't go well, then it's really not going to go well.
But one thing I noted that they don't directly mention in the episode is that they've essentially combined her findings on the Freudian theory between clitoral and vaginal orgasm with the couples phase of the study itself.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that.
Which is a compliment to her findings, at least. They're taking it seriously, and they are actually using what she's championed as something to talk about.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it speaks well of her that, even at last episode, that Bill was able to roll with her early findings so quickly, and now that they're implementing it in the study this soon, I think it does speak very well to that hypothesis, obviously.
Yeah. I remember on the first watch, you don't pick up on all of the little details in the first scene because you're just so like, oh my God, they are seriously going to do this. But on the rewatch, there are so many funny little moments. They can't look at each other. They keep having to look off across the room, and she's so bored. She reaches up and tapes the electrode back onto his chest, and he accidentally looks over his shoulder into the mirror and gets really embarrassed and has to look away. And there's all these little things that they did a good job really solidifying the awkwardness of it, but it plays off on rewatch, and it pays off long term, I guess.
Well, and I think that's what I appreciated about it because, although obviously Masters and Johnson were quite successful with their research with each other, and generally it was nice to have that little tongue-in-cheek moment where, it's not all sunshine and roses the first time, even for these two. It's pretty damn awkward, and you're going to see just how awkward it is to the minute detail.
Yeah, this show commits to it.
Which I love, frankly.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. One thing I wanted to mention about this entire episode was that it has a repeating theme I noticed of people who can't bring themselves to look at each other. And obviously that's true, especially with Bill and Ginny in the opening scene, but it continues. Barton and Margaret can't bring themselves to look at each other the morning after she has Austin over. He keeps trying to look into the newspaper. Bill and Libby kind of have a hard time looking at each other, and he has to force himself to look into her eyes when he comes home early and they have sex in front of the fireplace. And who else has a problem with it? But those moments.
Bill and Barton, when he's sewing up Barton, they can't look at each other. Obviously, that's as much as positioning as awkwardness, but I think that's purposeful.
Right, that's a good point. And I think when Barton and Dale are in the hotel, Barton looks into the mirror to watch Dale, who is sitting over his shoulder. So there are all these moments where people can't bring themselves to look at each other. People aren't telling the truth. There's a lot of lying in this episode. In fact, every scene with two characters talking has a lie of some kind in it. I'm pretty sure that's in every single scene. But when people do finally look at each other, there's some kind of resolution to their relationship. There's some kind of advancement towards understanding each other better, at least for one of them. Because what I'm thinking of is Bill and Libby in front of the fireplace. He finally looks into her eyes the way she'd requested back in the pilot. You know, why can't we make love looking at each other just once? And here he does it, but there's still, you kind of get the feeling that he's imagining Ginny there with him. But anyway, those were the two things that I noticed throughout this episode.
Well, and I noticed, you mentioned Dale and Barton initially looking across the room through the mirror, but then later in that scene, they're able to look each other in the eyes, and that was one of the notable parts for me, because it's not just, obviously, a transactional relationship. Dale helps Barton after the stabbing, and we see that they actually do have genuine feelings for each other.
And you really kind of get the feeling that's one of the, I guess, purest relationships in this show. Which is kind of a funny thing to say because it's built on lies and prostitution, but it's really one of genuine affection and fondness for each other, and it's kind of innocent in a way, the way Barton takes Dale's hands and kisses them, and it's just very sweet.
It is. I mean, he really, there's a side of him in those scenes that we don't see even when he's with Margaret, partially because he's living this lie that he has built with Margaret and with his family, but he's very vulnerable and very human in those moments, and we haven't really been able to see that side of him completely.
Yeah, plus Dale just continues to be awesome.
Oh, I love Dale.
He's a champ.
He's got his shit together.
So then we kind of move on to Bill's endless parade of weeping secretaries.
He doesn't like it when they file alphabetically.
He has a problem with anyone who is not Virginia. And I have here in my notes that part of the constant feeling of rejection comes across from him as frustration and possessiveness because he's worried that she'll end their sexual participation and just sort of drift away from him and become kind of an entity of her own.
Yeah, I think you're right, definitely. But I also see it as him, not that he doesn't want her to go too far and, stray away, but he does, like you said, there's that possessiveness. He wants that tie there between them and for her to be, as close as possible.
Yeah, but luckily Jane comes along, and Jane, the world does not deserve Jane.
I love Jane to death.
She is too good for us.
I love how she has her little spelling bee moment. She just goes through like she's the champ.
She and Ginny plotted this out beforehand, and Jane just dives in head first. She is ready for all things and anything, and I want her to be on this show forever. I would follow a spin-off of her, just having adventures.
Yeah, one of the few notes that I took down about Jane for this episode was bitch getting shit done, because
that's right.
She is just moving. I don't think Bill can say that she's incompetent in any means.
And this is true. And we have Austin and Margaret. Their tryst, their tete-a-tete.
Now on the home front.
True.
I thought their meeting in the bar was interesting. Like you said, obviously there's so many scenes where characters are saying one thing when they mean another and lying by omission and sort of hinting at the truth and never really circling around to it. But when they met in the bar, I don't know what I thought initially. I didn't think that this show was going to be stupid enough to force some sort of awkward encounter with Barton and Margaret immediately. I don't know. It surprised me that they picked back up where they left off at the movies so quickly and really ratcheted up the stakes by bringing him back to her house.
I did like that they had that moment where he kind of tried to do some damage control and be like, on the one hand, I don't want you to be like the crazy ex hookup, but on the other, I don't want you to think of me as a cad. Like, and that jockeying and that kind of like trying to figure out what she thought, and she just like waves her hand and goes, no, no, honey, I am not crazy. All right, we're fine. We're cool.
I haven't done this before, but I'm older than you and I'm smoother than you.
Like,
so
it does not
fine.
matter. I don't give a shit. It does not matter. Which I really respect her for. That's a pretty chill attitude to have.
Yeah, I mean, especially for a woman of her time, just not giving a damn.
Yeah, that was nice. And then the fact that he brought her cashews, that I put a little note down that was kind of reminded me of that scene in Stranger Than Fiction when Will Ferrell's character brings Maggie Gyllenhaal flowers. She's a baker and he brings her bags of different kinds of flour. That was sweet.
I thought it was funny how they don't really dote on each other, but they do. Especially Margaret just spoils him rotten. It cracked me up because for all the trying to disprove the Freudian theories last episode, this episode it was just back with a vengeance.
Oh God! I even on the rewatch, I had to watch that scene where she gives him the sandwich and she hands him the glass of milk and says, "Drink up. You're gonna need your strength." Like I watched it through my fingers. I was just
You're a growing boy now, Austin.
So
Mommy
embarrassing. Just so terrible. Did you get the feeling that Austin kind of enjoys playing tourist and kind of shifting in and out of other people's lives and other people's roles to see what it's like?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially when we had that moment, he's wandering around in his underwear and he goes, are these his glasses? Is this his chair? You go to someone's house, you might just try and look at some stuff and figure out, what their interests are based on what's lying around. But for Austin to try and sit down and role play like, I am Dean Scully, what would I be doing? What would I be reading through these glasses and in this chair? It's almost like narcissism in a way, but it's not. And I can't quite put my finger on why it's so funny.
And I think it completes a thought that this show started last episode when they met outside the movie theater, and he had that strange philosophical moment where he said, isn't it strange to think of other people looking in your windows and seeing who you are, but when you're inside your own house, you can't look out and imagine anyone else looking in. He's a deeper character than, and this is true of everyone. Congratulations, Masters of Sex writers. You've made us harp on this every episode. The characters are just so deep. They're just so deep, and I have nothing else to say but that he's so much deeper than you really think he is at first.
I think it's funny, even in the psychotherapy, when he's back with Dr. Cameron Fry and went out with this girl and she was this and this girl's a sex kitten and this is this. And Cameron Fry just says, have you thought of any of these women as real people? And it kind of stuns him. Like, I don't understand what you mean.
Which is amazing because on the one hand, he has reflective thoughts about other people's lives, but he can't get to that point where he sees individuals as true individuals outside of his own life. It's kind of a weird juxtaposition.
And that's what I was trying to say earlier, where it's almost like narcissism because he's not self-involved to the point where he can't see anyone around him.
The way Bill is.
But there's some sort of mental block where it's like, I can't even articulate why I find it so fascinating, but it's just funny to me.
Do you want to talk about Ethan and Vivian?
Let's do it.
Okay, so once again, continuing this theme of people lying to each other, Ethan, not only does he lie to Vivian about what he's doing that morning, he even he's sneaking around getting dressed, and then he pulls his tie out from underneath her head. Like, he has a closet full of ties. I'm sure he could have picked any other tie, but he purposely wakes her up at the end of his morning routine. He's about ready to rush out the door, and he wakes her up so that she can't get up, make him breakfast, and keep him late from his date with GINI buying a car. And Vivian, I mean, I think she really gets a sense, because she just looks dismayed throughout that whole conversation about finding other girls' numbers on the matchbooks. Like, she doesn't genuinely find it as funny as he does.
Oh, he thinks that joke is the most hilarious thing to ever come out of his mouth.
And Vivian obviously feels like she can't compete with Virginia, even though she has no idea who Virginia is.
And it's almost, I wrote down in my notes, they're trying to be domestic. What exactly are they trying to prove to each other and to themselves by being in this relationship? Because, I mean, obviously Vivian, Ethan is her man with hearts and sparkles and stars. She just thinks he's amazing, and, she is his rebound, and yet they're forcing it just to prove to each other almost that they can be normal people and that this is a good thing and this is what they should want, which it's sad.
Do you want to move on? Do you want to move on to GINI buying a car? It kind of goes hand in hand with that.
I think we should, yeah.
So they're talking about the number of people who lose their virginity in the back seats of cars. And something really telling about Ethan's line of dialogue, he guesses that Virginia lost her virginity to her math teacher. Throughout this episode, Ethan has some subconscious thoughts come to the surface. It's like he's realizing somehow that GINI is involved with an authority figure. He keeps returning to that idea.
Yeah, he keeps landing on types, and it's always nerdy, strange, older authority figures as opposed to, some cute quarterback.
I did think it was cute how GINI was going to ask Bill to be her co-signer.
Can you imagine Bill Masters in that parking lot?
Trying to come in and disperse those flies who were buzzing around GINI.
Oh my god. What was the one guy saying that she looked like Grace Kelly?
I was like, nah.
Maybe on acid.
She could not look less like Grace Kelly. She's a very Audrey Hepburn type. She's in the Mad Men universe, you're either a Marilyn or a Jackie, and Virginia is a Jackie. At least on the outside.
At least with that hairdo,
yeah. Yeah. But I thought it was kind of funny because typically a co-signer would be like your husband.
Well, and I think it's important, obviously that they showed that because as much agency as Virginia is getting at work and in her personal life has some, not freewheeling, but she does have flexibility, and yet she has to get a man to physically be there on the lot to sign for this car for her.
Yeah. But I think it also goes to show that Bill essentially has two wives.
Oh yeah, it's become more than work wife and home wife at this point. The
wife A, wife B.
Yeah.
Day wife, night wife. Well, that's actually the same person.
Do you want to talk about Libby and Ethan?
Yeah, sure.
Well, obviously Libby hatching all sorts of great ideas, wanting a child to save her marriage and bring her closer to Bill.
Because that has never gone wrong.
That is always the correct way to approach it.
That has never been a source of drama.
As pawns in your marriage, that's always going to go well.
Yeah, so Libby really thinks that she knows best. And like you say, all she's doing is adding another variable to the very fucked up mess of Bill's inner psyche. And of course, her relationship with him. I mean, yes, it would save her. It would give her, valuation and purpose in life. But as far as repairing a relationship, she should pay attention to the movies.
Yeah, that boat, I believe, has sailed, but thank you for playing.
And you'd think, and I'm not serious here, but you'd think Libby would have learned from last episode that she does not know as much as she thinks she does, and she is not quite as adventurous as she'd like to be.
Well, and I guess that's why it's kind of interesting where she thinks she's just going to seduce him back to her, and they're going to have this renaissance of intimacy and closeness and coupledom because, obviously they haven't had that for a while, but did they ever have that?
Did you think that when Bill and GINI were doing the intake interviews and Bill said that he lost his virginity at age 20 in a cabin on Rainbow Lake, and did you think that, for some reason I remember somewhere somebody saying, well, that must have been with Libby.
I didn't think it was with Libby.
Neither did I. I mean, you and I have both read the book now, so we both know, but...
But, I mean, because... he goes on to say, well, my spouse and I didn't have sex before we got married, and so
yeah, that's true.
Meeting Ethan in the pediatric ward for the insemination.
Oh, poor girl. She has to be in that.
Metaphors on metaphors.
Yeah, yikes. And again, in that scene where they're sitting outside talking on the bench, Ethan objects a little too loudly and a little too quickly when he says Bill and Ginny aren't going to run off together.
That's what I found funny. He wasn't offended, but it was as close as you can get to being offended without actually worrying about their feelings.
Mm-hmm. Oh, let's talk about Barton's misadventures.
Oh, as soon as that guy popped up in the passenger window, I had a feeling he was going to get hurt in some way.
Yeah, and then it was very violent. I think that's the most violence that we've had on this show so far.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But luckily, Dale came up and is awesome and generous and totally came to the rescue. Dale, Rescue Ranger.
Did you think before this episode that they had genuine feelings for each other, or were you what were you assuming the nature of their relationship was up until this point?
I thought it was more transactional, and it was more not clinical exactly, but more transactional, especially because of the way they meet in Barton's red car. And Barton just flat out asks him, have you been talking to any sex researchers about me? And Dale flat out lies to him. I mean, yeah, but it was an unusual kind of turnaround in a way.
See, I only asked that because I kind of wondered. I thought that it was more of a, romantic relationship, just because Barton, obviously, in the previous episode, when he's asking Dale those questions, he's worried about security and worried about his reputation, but Dale is able to pacify him so quickly, and so I automatically kind of wondered, well, there's got to be something more there. It can't just be, a courtesan kind of relationship, because
I see what you mean. If they truly were detached from each other, Barton probably wouldn't be so quick to believe Dale. He probably
it would have taken more than 2 minutes to turn him around from did you give me up to, well, I guess I can stay in this car while you touch me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we have Barton and Bill having their conversation while Bill stitches his mentor up.
What did you think about Bill's reaction to this? Because, obviously he was able to infer what was going on and said so. But I just thought it was so interesting because he does get upset about it. He says, say nothing if you want, but don't lie to me. And it was such a strong reaction from Bill, who up until this point hasn't had a lot of strong reactions like that.
I think it played out exactly the way I thought, you would think a scene like that could. Obviously, Bill is going to say he's going to scold Barton, and obviously we're meant to infer that Bill could just as easily be talking to himself, about what he's doing with Ginny in the lab. I guess what surprised me the most about that scene was that Barton just kind of goes along with what Bill has to say.
Right.
He seems genuinely kind of, yeah, you're right.
I thought it was sad, but also indicative of the kind of relationship that they have, that Barton is trying to spin all these ridiculous stories about what happened, like he eventually does in this episode with Margaret, because he's trying to tell Bill about how he got jumped by a bunch of different guys at the train station. No, it was before the train station. No, it was, and then Bill's just like, come on, man, just stop, just tell me the truth, don't say anything.
I almost wondered if it was going to be a reconciliation of their relationship, but
that's what I wondered too.
I think that takes some more time. It doesn't really seem like they're back on the same level with each other until the last episode.
But I think this does go a significant way because obviously, Barton has never been able to talk to anyone about this except for the boys that he's been with, and so to have someone like Bill to say, look, you have to be careful, you almost got killed, underlying theme, I don't want anything to happen to you. I think that's important. It does reaffirm not necessarily the bond that they have, but it does show that they can't just cut each other off so coldly like they pretended they could.
Yeah, and it's not like Bill can completely get away, not that he was saying this, but it's not like he could get away with saying, well, the fact that he takes the time to stitch Barton up in the first place goes a long way toward a subtext of actually giving a shit about him, even though he's pretty harsh in what he tells him. I mean, it was socially acceptable to basically be like, you're going to ruin your life if you do this. But the
Right.
fact that he's, taking the time to carefully put him back together again and not just leave him alone, or worse, dump him off at ER,
Right.
I think that says something.
I agree. Let's talk about Barton and Margaret and the awkwardness of Barton coming home too early.
That surprised me for all of Barton's commanding nature at the university, and yelling at Bill in the early episodes, don't fuck with me.
Right.
He just went along with what she said. It was obvious what was happening, and she said, I need you to go to your room and stay there. And he just went upstairs.
Well, and I thought it was so strange because obviously, when we see them at breakfast the next morning, obviously he does care about her. He does understand that there's something wrong with their relationship, but I guess it's in the way that Margaret expresses it, because she tries so hard to hide the fact that she's having this affair, and then when that doesn't work and she knows it's not going to work, she just says, okay, just pretend you don't see anything, you see nothing, go to your room, something will happen, and then I'm going to bed. Like, she was asking Barton in some ways to understand why she was upset. Why aren't you jealous? Why don't you want me? I mean, obviously he understands what is being asked of him, but can't express in any way, why he doesn't have that interest.
It's amazing to watch their relationship go from the public, happy, charming nature that it was at the anniversary party to them yelling at each other and throwing things, or at least Margaret yelling.
And one of the interesting things from this conversation that I saw was, when Margaret, in last episode, she's doing the intake questionnaire for the sex study before they decide, and she says that she and Barton have sex once a year or less. And then here in this argument, it comes out that he hasn't laid a hand on her supposedly in 6 years. So
she must have been. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's quite a discrepancy, and it kind of proves Bill's theory that, people do fudge details of their sexual histories.
Yeah, she must have been doing a bit of mental or mathematical acrobatics, trying to average out the number of years that they'd been married and then giving a number.
Let's talk about Libby and Jenny.
Okay.
I just thought that was so strange a conversation. I guess especially for, looking back, because yes, powerful men were going to have these secretaries who fixed every detail of their lives. But for Libby, even with the relationship that she and Ginny have, to come up and say, look, I need you to get my husband home early for sex reasons, if you can manage that. I was surprised that Libby would be so forthright, even with someone who is her friend.
I think she just feels desperation, and she is really taking Ethan's word on making sure that it happens. And I think,
oh yeah, I mean, that definitely was a part of it, but it surprised me that she approached Jenny and, got someone else involved in it.
Yeah, and I think Ginny felt an even better, she felt more than ever that she needed to take care of this, because what Libby comes in and tells her puts the lie to what Bill conveniently allows her to believe in the intake interview. Because it turns out Libby would desperately love to be having sex with her husband.
Yeah, and I forgot about the intake interview when Bill just sort of says, well, we haven't, and Ginny really
assumes.
She assumes, and then she digs at herself for even bringing it up, almost, even though they're filling out a questionnaire, not just for fun.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those intake interviews.
Okay.
And their second run. Oh, I think the biggest thing there was that, did you think Ginny's responses and her comments were kind of cruel in a way?
For example?
It didn't come off as especially sensitive when and maybe she was being pointed about it, but when he asked her, are you currently having sex? And she said no. And he says, you don't have a partner? Like, hello, I'm sitting right here in front of you. And she's just like, no. And it's just, she has a very narrow definition, I guess, of what that means in the context of the study. And I don't know, that seemed like a bit of a blow to his ego.
Well, and see, I didn't take it as her being...
Maybe not direct, but just not feeling the need to be particularly sensitive about it. I'm not saying that necessarily Bill needed it, but it just seemed unusual.
And see, I didn't really think much of it because, obviously, now you pointed that out, that Bill was kind of like, hey, I'm sitting right in front of you. we are having sex, wouldn't I count? And I assumed Ginny was thinking, Bill obviously has Libby as his partner. I am not dating anyone outside of this room, so no partners for me. I didn't assume that to be a purposeful slight, really.
I got the feeling from her expression that she was making a special little point of it. Like I don't know, it was just in the way she looked at him. And then again, when he said, they were asking each other whether they'd had sex before they married, and then she starts in with, I guess it never occurred to me to wait. And that just that was like a little dig, like, oh, you waited?
Yeah, that was funny.
That seemed a little unnecessary. I don't know.
But it didn't surprise me that she would say that. I didn't, it was a dig, but it didn't come off as super Regina George so much as just this little passive aggressive, oh, of course you waited,
You're Bill.
You're you.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how Ginny approaches Bill and approaches Libby in such totally different manners? And I guess it's totally based on the way they treat her in turn. But she is willing to be very sensitive to Libby's problems and very understanding and supportive and guilty, of course. There's a lot of guilt involved there, but when it comes to Bill, she's a lot more willing to just let the chips fall where they may, I think.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, kind of. So then after that, they actually managed to successfully complete the response cycle, and Bill is quite smug.
I just love his little, dry reaches, how many times was it? Let's examine these in what positions? Just, on the pretext of gathering data, but really just needing to hear it again and again.
I won.
I thought it was notable, too, that right after they have a successful run at this, so to speak, he tries to invite her to dinner, and she kind of has to remind him, dinner? And then the phone rings, and obviously he gets called away.
Let's talk about when Ginny has to turn down Bill.
Let's see,
It's after Libby comes in to see her, and all of a sudden the scene starts where Bill is putting his clothes back on, and Ginny is just standing there. And on the first go-around, some reviewers seem to think that they had sex, and then she was like, oh, by the way, we can't do this anymore because your wife needs attention. And that is absolutely not what happened. He was sitting there waiting for her naked with the electrodes attached, probably, or at least partially so, and she came in and said, now hold on a second, we need to talk. Put your clothes back on, bucko.
Time out.
Yeah, pretty much. Because, and also, the EKG machines over in the observation room weren't on. There's also the question of why she wasn't putting her clothes back on. I mean, she'd obviously just walked into the room.
I just thought it was so funny how, he really got a stick in his craw about this. He got completely ready for the commencing research, and then she turned him down. And at that point, he just goes off into a tailspin of petty anger, really.
Yeah, because it's like they're having two separate conversations. She comes in and says, Libby really wants you back. I can't keep doing this if it's going to be at the cost of your marriage. And he just goes off on this big justification about why it's so noble, because he's following in the footsteps of all these other people who've experimented on themselves. It's not weird at all. And it's like he's having an argument about something that she isn't talking about.
Yeah, he talks about Jonas Salk for 15 minutes, and she's standing there like, well, that's not going to help your wife not be lonely. Go home.
Yeah, and when you figure that out, and when you have sex with your wife, then you can come have sex with me. Which is an excellent, excellent plot development.
Certainly not one we thought we would see articulated in the show so soon.
But it's nice to have our expectations subverted.
Yeah, I do like that they twisted this a little bit. It wasn't just Bill and Jenny saying, oh, no, I feel terrible, what have we done? It was...
She uses the carrot that she's got.
Yeah.
Which is herself. And when they leave the exam room, or when Ginny comes out, she's incredibly nervous that Ethan is gonna, get a glimpse inside of what's going on. She's trying to distract him and maybe get him to move down the hall. You can see panic all over her face. And then Bill exits, putting his coat back on, and Ethan is pretty close to figuring out what's going on now.
Yeah, you see wheels turning.
And in a later episode, he kind of dances around the topic. So I think he doesn't have confirmation, but I think that and the two earlier events where he is really subconsciously putting that together, I think that's obviously what pushes him into finally securing his relationship with Vivian by domesticating himself
Right.
through Libby. Did we already talk about Bill and Libby getting together in front of the fireplace? I know we mentioned it, but I don't know. I don't have much to say about it.
We did a little bit. I guess really the thing that I took away from it, besides the fact that, he recognized a request of Libby's, was that playing the dashing hero really seems to work for them. As well as, I think Bill was maybe a little worked up after getting jilted on the research front.
Yeah, looking for an outlet.
Yeah.
We can move on to the last part.
I don't have anything else in my notes here that needs more coverage.
I liked that they intercut this scene with them getting ready, because you don't see that really at any other point. This is the only time when they're, I think, in the whole series, or in this season, when they're taping the electrodes onto themselves, because really they tend to focus on long before and just after.
Right.
It's curious how they leave certain things out, because there's all this build up and then there's them actually doing it. You know what we never see is the immediate aftermath. It always cuts to them fully dressed.
You're right.
Isn't that strange?
Huh.
And I wonder if we're going to get that this season, like the awkwardness of like, and now it's over, and now we have to climb off of each other and put our clothes back on.
The weird intimacy that they're building.
It's intercut with Bill talking about, in his usual indirect manner, complimenting how awesome GINI is and how great he thinks she is.
He couldn't pick Stella out of a lineup.
Or a Xenia.
Yeah, I really liked that scene because, obviously we've been talking about the progression of their relationship, but especially, this particular moment on this night, they really do seem to be synchronized and on that same wavelength for once, which obviously helps them in the research portion.
And GINI is making big strides to try to keep up with him. She goes off and researches the Kama Sutra on her own. And
yeah, I liked her flip little way of announcing that. That cracked me up.
It's amazing that she can, that she's got it in her head. She can pull the official name of it just from his description of it. Like, she's studied up.
I just imagine as soon as, she talked to the couple who was studying it in the first place and figured out that Bill and his Lotus were going to be smug forever, she just went and read up as much as she could.
Sitting at home with a copy of the Kama Sutra on her bedside. That's interesting.
By God, she is not going to get shown up by Bill Masters and his book.
Gotta avoid those awkward conversations. And then this is endlessly awkward. It's beautiful that they achieve this together so quickly, and the participation. It's a really beautifully choreographed and filmed moment, and then they completely ruin it by calling out that they're both having an orgasm at the same time. Like, it's really on rewatch. It's so cheesy. It's so.
Their number system also cracked me up a little bit too.
That's a genuine thing, and I don't know if they may have developed that, but that's still used in sex manuals.
I think they did develop that.
Yeah, that would make sense, but yeah, that's interesting. That's a nice little shorthand to use. And then I think I don't know exactly what we're supposed to take out of the very end of that, because they look at each other, their bond or whatever you want to call it is even deeper now, but then it's like I think she's still contracting. And I don't know if that's meant to be multiple orgasms or if she's just like shocked. I don't know.
I saw it as shock, because obviously like they're staring at each other, they're having this intense experience, and I think it just surprises her that it happened at all, let alone relatively so little time into the research.
Well, but she really induced it, didn't she? She, made him stop what he was doing and readjust themselves to each other.
Right. But I thought it was surprise mostly just because, obviously, we in the beginning of the episode, it's her just saying, my God, this is the worst. Like, nothing is really happening down there. And then compared to now where she, is getting into it. So
more of an active participant.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't want to forget to mention the fact that in the opening scene that when they debrief each other later, when they're talking about it afterward, Bill mentions that the male subject was in the plateau phase for like almost 9 minutes, which is the same amount of time that Betty's John was in the pilot for fucking ever. That was a nice callback.
I already miss Betty.
She'll be back. And then there's the scene afterwards when they're both magically dressed again. They all have all their clothes on, and GINI starts to get this longing look on her face, like she'd really like to sit down and talk about this over dinner.
And Bill sprints home.
Did you think that he kind of caught on to what was going on and was smug is maybe too strong a word, but maybe he was kind of satisfied over the fact that, yeah, I'm doing exactly what you told me, going home to my wife, and you're just going to stay here by yourself?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of lording that over, because she did have a visibly kind of disappointed look, and he was saying, well, I'm seeing my wife for a late dinner. Isn't this the thing we just argued about?
Yeah, it's like, you're getting exactly what you asked for. Hope you enjoy that.
Hope it's delicious.
Oh, one thing that I noticed, Bill does it really early in the episode when he's talking to the Kama Sutra couple, and I think, I may be misremembering, but I think GINI does something like it here too. They both have pens in their hands, and they both make like that fucking hand gesture with their hand, like just like pushing the pen in and out of their fist. Like they both do it in this episode, I think.
I missed that completely, but now I want to rewatch.
Bill does it really obviously when he's stuttering and trying to think of how to explain the sex study to the Prescotts. It's a really great moment. He's just like furiously doing that.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
No, that's something I did not pick up on, but I am very glad that you mentioned it.
And I love that she cannot force herself to sound cool when she starts asking about, so I hope you're taking her to someplace nice, and it's like obviously she can't disguise the fact that she is not cool with this.
Yeah, she can't even fake enthusiasm, which is surprising.
Yeah.
So besides our awkward pen gestures, is there anything else from this episode we want to revisit?
I think that closes out this episode, which was a great one. It was nicely done.
Excellent.
Alrighty, well, we will be back next time to talk about episode 8. And for now, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you later.
Bye.